Ordinary Numbers by Cryptaria. Chapter 8, November 2012. Working help desk meant Mike Taylor was effectively invisible. Perhaps out of concern for his grieving, Iris began to increase Mike's responsibilities, even though he'd carefully monitored his productivity to stay just under the threshold for promotion. He'd painstakingly calculated the perfect path to career mediocrity, only to have his whatever's fake suicide throw it all into a tailspin. It was, however, useful. As a senior technician, he was dispatched on what Iris called field calls, and everyone else called getting out of the bloody bullpen for a walk every once in a while. His new badge gave him access to all sorts of surprising places. He was tempted to take a few side trips, if not for the fact that badge use was monitored. Everything was monitored, in fact, from doors to comms to environmental systems, air pressure, hot water, and even motion-sensitive light switches. It was a smart building with a near infinite number of signals routed into a computer somewhere in the building, though he had no idea where. The thought gave him chills. It wasn't a 1984 Big Brother feeling so much as the lingering echo of James's warning. An IT compromise, bad computer security protocols, and a building that collected data on its inhabitants, from the janitor's use of cleaning chemicals to when M herself, the legendary head of MI6, got a fresh cup of tea. Data, Taylor knew, was as much a weapon as a gun. More so, in fact. With the right data, he could construct every detail of a person's life, or we could wipe that life from every system in the world, erasing that person far more thoroughly than mere death ever would. So he accepted his promotion to senior tech and kept his eyes and ears open. He took note of where the cameras and sensors were. He began to learn which sinks operated from motion sensors rather than valves, and which air conditioning vents wouldn't kick on until a room was inhabited. And when he was back at his desk, he began to watch, just to watch, internal network traffic ebb and flow, with the people coming and going, a tidal force of data that peaked at 9:30 in the morning and again at 3 in the afternoon. The midday data surge was followed by a deep lull as people left the building for lunch, since on many days the cafeteria food was risky at best. With 2 months' worth of data, Taylor could have painted an accurate snapshot of MI6, a day in the life, as the saying went. And all he needed was access to the network. This was the type of human intelligence that would have taken a team of infiltrators months to put together as they spread through various departments and observed, with notebooks and watches, and they still wouldn't have learned that the Chief of Staff, Bill Tanner, never drank tea, but M always did, so there was both an electric kettle and a coffee machine in the executive office. The only flaw with his new responsibility was that he could only work days. But at least a steady schedule made Sherry feel better, and gave James a regular timetable to safely reach him at home. He made it a point to always get home by 6 at the latest, even if it meant he had to order dinner in rather than stopping somewhere on the way. James had started responding to the habit by calling every night at 5 minutes past, sometimes only for a few minutes, sometimes for hours, until they were forced to plug in their phones or have the batteries run flat. The day after one such marathon call, Taylor was yawning, thinking that he should have had more caffeine and less sugar at lunch. The 3 o'clock crash was hitting him hard, so he took the stairs, tempting as the lift was. He'd actually started avoiding the lifts anyway. They, too, were computer-controlled, and lately he'd been thinking a bit too much of how the Red Queen controlled the Hive in Resident Evil, as opposed to the RQOS, whose cleaning bots apparently were known to occasionally display pack-hunting behavior as their method of control. He was jogging down the stairs 2 at a time when he felt the tremors, and at first he blamed it on the post-lunch dizziness. He'd have to get chocolate or something to raise his blood sugar. Then the building seemed to lurch, and pressure swathed him as his ears started to ring, all sound gone distance. He grabbed the stairwell railing and sat down hard. The laptop slung over his shoulder hit the edge of the stairs, and he had a brief crazed moment of worry that he'd chipped the case before he realized that the noise ringing in his head had been an explosion. A big enough explosion to rock the entire building. That couldn't be good. Taylor's first thought was how best to escape and find out what the heck was going on. Someone had to know. Security, perhaps, but his memory of the Protect and Survive pamphlet series came back in a flash, and he realized that he was in a very enviable position. In a stairwell, with a laptop on a network. There was no safer place to figure out what was going on than here. He sat cross-legged on the nearest landing, fingers twitching over his mobile very briefly before he pulled out his computer. He didn't know anything yet, and it would be supremely unwise to place an international call to an unknown number when security was probably on its highest alert. So he pulled up his terminal to access internal communications instead. After watching it for 2 hours, he had a feel for the rhythm of the network. Now he watched data tides shift as egress point traffic spiked from people fleeing the building. Systems were shutting down in ways that were good, such as data integrity, and bad, such as firewalls. "Not bloody likely," he muttered, pulling open file browser windows to access the folders where he stored his most powerful network security programs. He targeted high-risk areas first: the executive offices, the armory, and the servers where the analysts kept their data. As he watched the quick destruction of port security protocols, Taylor couldn't help but be impressed. Whoever was behind this was good. Genius level good. They sliced through intervention programs like they were butter, using a combination of brute force, like overflow attacks, and unidentified security flaws. Which only made sense if A, someone had put them there, or B, someone was completely familiar with their systems. Or both. Taylor didn't have time to focus on that thought, though, before he was completely drawn into the task of systematic intervention. It almost felt like a dance, anticipating where the hacker was going to attack and killing the viral and worms before they could do their damage. And it was, Taylor knew, a hacker, a single person sitting on the other side of MI6's security protocols, trying to bring it to ruin. A genius, to be sure, but also someone who was arrogant enough to think he couldn't be stopped by anyone within MI6. And God, did Taylor enjoy proving him wrong. Lulled by the slow pace of life on the Aegean Sea, Bond had fallen into the strangest routine of what was admittedly a strange life. Mornings he swam lazily in water still warm despite the lateness of the year. Sometimes he didn't get out of bed until midday, but he always spent at least an hour in the waves, letting the gentle stretch ease the pain of poorly healed wounds and abused. His black market contacts kept him supplied with codeine or whatever opiates they could smuggle into Greece, and in return he bought their silence. Everyone's silence, with rounds at one of the beach huts that served as a local bar. A part of him loved it here in this dingy hellhole at the arse end of the Mediterranean. Every day he ate fish that had been alive just a half hour before, fresh off the fire pit or frying pan. He drank ouzo and thought that he'd just stay by the beach and drink until he couldn't see anymore. And every evening, as it grew dark, he found himself going back to the shack he called home now, so he could talk on the phone. It was ridiculous. He was infatuated with a voice and a fantasy, someone he'd never bloody seen while he'd had the chance. And now he didn't have the chance. He couldn't even ask Mike to send him one of those horrid snaps taken in the mirror because there wasn't a data plan out here. He was lucky to have analog reception at all. When the irritation grew to be too much, he'd ring off and go find someone to fuck. Or he'd get drunk and play stupid bar games until he passed out at the hut with its mismatched chairs and rickety bar stools. He'd made the owner rich, at least by local standards, so he inevitably woke up to find his windbreaker draped over his shoulders, his pockets unpicked. On this particular dreary afternoon, he woke in the bar with a hangover that would drive a saint to suicide and the lingering memory of getting very angrily drunk, so he could forget the temptation to do something interminably stupid, like ask Mike what he'd been wearing, which was the first thought that had come to him as he'd heard the creak of bed springs around midnight London time. Down the bar there was an overturned glass with a scorpion trapped underneath. He found a few bills and waved them in the direction of his very wealthy bartender, who was making some effort to sweep sand off the floor. Why he bothered, Bond had no idea. Probably to have something to do. God knew he didn't bother washing glasses. Not that Bond cared at this point. He took a couple of codeine, splashed alcohol into a glass, and washed the pills down, thinking that the next time he fell asleep at the bar, he should ask the bartender to kick over his stool so he'd at least sleep on his back. That hurt less. He glanced unwillingly in the mirror, thinking he looked like death warmed over. Better he stay here in Greece, where he could die as the odd foreigner. He'd planned on coming back from the dead after a couple of weeks, then a month, then longer, And as much as a part of him wanted to actually see Taylor, to have that stupid chicken dinner date with him and the cat, he didn't want Taylor to see him. And every day it got worse. Now he looked away from his reflection, hearing words in American English teasing at his consciousness. Described as a major terror attack in the heart of London. No one has yet claimed responsibility for what sources are calling a possible cyber-terrorist assault on the British Secret Service. Bond stopped breathing. He rose, steady on his feet for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, and turned. Early reports from the scene indicate at least 6 dead and many more injured, with victims being evacuated to local hospitals within minutes of the explosion. The scene on the telly was split between Wolf Blitzer and Legoland, smoke pouring from where M's office had once been. M had earned his loyalty and hatred in equal measure, but for once it wasn't her who came to mind first. Taylor.